to the UIAAA Connection podcast. GoFan and VNN are proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection. Now a combined company, GoFan and VNN provide a seamless integration for digital ticketing and athletic websites. Direct your fans to one place for all your athletic events, communications, and tickets to home and away games. Thank you to GoFan and VNN for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest Sandi Wagner, Certified Athletic Administrator, the Executive Director of the Alaska Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association. Welcome to the podcast, Sandi.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Let's have you just take a few minutes and share with our audience across the U.S. and across the world now, where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
Well, I grew up in Washington, attended Mercer Island High School, was there during the first few years of Title IX. So it got me very involved in sports because they started offering sports for us. Then I attended the University of Washington, played volleyball and soccer for them. Then I went down and got a teaching degree from Arizona State, came back to the University of Washington and got a master's in sports medicine, and started my first job as a director of cardiac rehab program. My husband got a job.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that. So I don't know if I've ever had anybody on the podcast that's a director of cardio rehab. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, it was a program that was started in Washington called Capri, and it was designed for individuals that had had a heart attack or high blood pressure or whatever. And we ran workout sessions for them, usually in the morning, but there were some in the afternoon, and they would come in and insurance would pay for it. And we'd have defibs there for them, which were a little different than they are nowadays. And the whole idea was to give them good exercise information, nutritional information, and teach them how to lead a healthier life.
That's excellent. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, so continue on after that.
So after that, my husband got a job in Alaska, moved to Alaska. I was looking at continuing with cardiac rehab, but there wasn't anything available in the town we were in. So I applied to teach, and I've been involved in education ever since, 40 plus years.
Oh, that is, you deserve a gold star just for that. Anybody that's in education that long. So have you always, you've been in Anchorage. So I guess then my question is, because I know you work for the Alaska Activities Association, in addition to being the director of the IAAA, always had the same place in Alaska. Did you move around?
Yeah, we started in Juneau, which is the capital. We had the school itself was about 1,500 kids. I started as a middle school coach and teacher, moved to the high school and taught several different things: science, health, PE, and then the position of the athletic director came available, and my principal knew that I loved activities. I was coaching 3 sports at the time, and so I started working as an AD. And 26 years later, I retired from that and moved to Anchorage to work at the Alaska School Activities Association.
And how long have you been there?
About 10 years now, a little more than 10 years.
Okay, so let me ask you, I know this is out of order from from how I sent you the questions, but
that's okay.
I know, I think maybe New Mexico and maybe Arkansas has the same type of deal where they have someone that runs the AD association that works out of the state activities office. But I want you to talk about that, but I also want you to talk about some of the issues. I don't want to call them problems, but I'll call them challenges because Alaska is so spread out, and being able to talk with your ADs and being able to schedule. I mean, it may even be more difficult than Hawaii, where if you have to fly to a different island. But for example, I assume there's a high school in Ketchikan, but how do you get there if you have a contest to play? So I'm going to turn it over to you, let you talk
Yeah.
about that.
There are challenges in Alaska that are unique compared to other states. When I was the AD in Juneau, I spent well over $400,000 just on air travel. And
Wow.
yeah, and we would put our kids on a ferry Thursday morning. They would stay on the ferry for 18, 20 hours, depending on where they were going. They'd go play their games Friday and Saturday. They'd get back on the ferry Sunday morning and they'd return to school Monday morning. And that was very standard. People just are like, what do you mean you're on a ferry? Well, yeah, we're on an 18 to 20-hour ferry ride, a little different than a 2-hour bus ride or 5-minute bus ride. Um, but it's something for me, it was very important to be involved in this, to give the kids opportunities that were above and beyond being in the classroom or being just staying in their community. So yeah.
So tell me, you're in Juneau. What do you think your longest road trip was then? The farthest away school that you had played in contests?
Are you talking a road trip or our trip?
Okay, I shouldn't have said road trip because it's a ferry trip. What's the farthest away trip you had to get to compete against another school?
Ketchikan was a 24-hour ferry ride.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and then if we wanted to play Anchorage or Fairbanks, it was Anchorage was an 1.5-hour flight and Fairbanks was a 2-hour flight. So it's not it, and then you got to get a bus, or if we were going down
Right.
to the peninsula, you'd get off the plane, you'd rent vans, and you'd drive for 5 hours to get down to Homer, or yeah. So
Well, that's fascinating. That is incredible because, well, people, I live in suburban Salt Lake County here in Utah, and some of the schools at the south end of the valley complain if they have to go around the point of the mountain from Salt Lake County to Utah County, which is a 20-minute, 25-minute drive. And we don't want to go around the point of the mountain because it's too much travel. And I compare it to obviously your situation. That's just incredible. So
yeah,
that's
I think
I'm
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say, I think the biggest challenge is teaching coaches and going through rules and regulations that they are responsible for the kids 24 hours a day. And you get on a ferry on a Thursday morning and you don't return till Monday morning. It can be a little intense sometimes because you have to know where they are at all times and know what they're doing. So that's a
Yeah.
little different than a 20-minute bus ride.
I wanted to ask a follow-up about the ferry ride. So my only knowledge of ferries is when I was a teenager, and we went up to Juneau one year with my family, and we left our car in it's either
Rupert?
Prince Rupert or Prince Rupert, the one that's on the coast. Because
Prince Rupert.
right, and if we had taken our car on the ferry, there was a 3-week lag to get back. We went up for 4 days and came back on the car ferry. But I'm fascinated by, like you said, you have to be control these kids. So you got possibly 18 to 20 hours before you get to the contest site, and you've got these kids running loose on a boat, and then you've got to corral them coming back. I talk about a little bit more detail about some of those challenges.
Well, as a school, when I started working there, we put some pretty strict travel guides in place. Parents had to sign off on them, kids had to sign off on them. And if they broke them, they wouldn't travel anymore. But we'd get on the ferry. Usually I traveled with 2 other coaches, and we'd have about 30 to 40 kids with us. And we were very specific where they went on the ferry. They used to go up to the TV lounge and stake out their areas, and they had scheduled study time for 2 hours. We some of them brought their own food, some of them had to go get food, and we'd go through that. And then we came up with games they could play. We we did something called Fairy Olympics, where all the kids were put on teams and we gave them different challenges to do. And um, yeah, it was, and a lot of people were very curious about it, and they, want to talk to the kids. And but yeah, we were pretty strict about where they could be and what they could do. And but I think it was a good experience for them.
That's excellent. Let me ask you a little bit about some of the mentors and leaders you had in your life, both as a young lady and then in your professional career as an AD that helped you along the path.
Probably the person that helped me along the path as an AD. I mean, I took over being an AD with no background. I mean, I had a master's in sports medicine. I was a cardiac rehab director. So that wasn't the same as being an AD, but my principal at the time was very, very, very enthusiastic and supportive of activities. He worked very hard to make sure every kid got involved in some kind of activity. And when I was there, we had about an 85, 86% rate of kids being involved in some activity. But now I was in charge of not only sports, but also activities. I was in charge of music, drama, and DDF, and yeah, all, esports, and all of those were part of what was under me. But he took me under his wing and, explained that here's where we're at, here's what we do. And he worked with me very closely that first year. It was kind of like co-ADs, best thing that I ever happened to me. I learned to love the job, and just kept moving forward after that.
Thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you a little bit of a personal question here, Sandy. What's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from it?
Well, when you sent that question to me, I was like, oh goodness, I'm not really sure. I mean,
Mm.
there's been a lot of things go wrong, but we always seem to push through them and move forward. And it was never a disaster, complete disaster. And my kind of standard for that was, as long as the kids get their experience and they don't know what's going on behind the scenes, it's not working, I'm okay with that. But I did come up with one. My second year of being an AD, I did a lot of focusing on sports, and I spent a lot of time with coaches and the kids and making the sports be the most successful they could be. And I forgot about my activities. And we had a couple incidences with the music department failing because I hadn't given them as much time. And what I learned from it is that it didn't matter what activity the kids were in, I needed to support them all the same. And from then on, I did.
That is some great wisdom. Thanks so much for sharing that. Let me ask you how the job of athletic administrator has changed since you first got the job to where it is today.
I think, and I'm not sure this is the case, but when I first got the job, there wasn't, what I wanted to say, parents threatening lawsuits and being very involved in what was happening, and demanding that we give their kids the ability to get scholarship, a college scholarship. And that has changed drastically in this day and age. I mean, there's somebody that is going to sue because their kid can't transfer and then get the recognition they need to get a college scholarship. And I'm like, really? And the NIL has changed things a lot also. And as an AD, you've got to be part of that if you have a kid that's involved in the NIL. So, yeah, it's just become more, what do I want to say, business oriented. It's becoming more of a business where I truly believe when I was an AD, it was about getting kids involved. I mean, I
Right.
ran volleyball program and I had 100 kids playing because I didn't cut them. And that was one of the policies we put in place at the school was you don't get to cut kids unless you can show me that you don't have room for them, you have nothing for them to do, and you don't have enough help because I'll find you the help. So that was where we were at that point. And it seems to be more about running a business than it was then. It was about the kids then.
Yes.
And not just the top end kids, all kids. We didn't care if they were good or bad. We wanted all of them to be involved.
Well, and that's, I think, the philosophy that sometimes gets lost, particularly at some of the bigger schools. Let me ask you now a little bit about, because I've plead ignorance here. I don't know much about the Alaska ADs Association or the Activities Association because you guys are in Section 8, we're in Section 7. But I want you to share with our audience your journey with the IAAA and then the NIAAA, and of course, as we mentioned earlier, you have that co-role of also working in the Alaska State Activities Association.
Right. Back in the late 90s, there was a group of people in our state that tried to get what we call the AKI-AAA, because it can't be the AI-AAA because that's Arizona. So we're
Right.
the AKI-AAA going, and it kind of went for a couple years and then it petered out. But at that time, I joined the NIAAA, started going to conferences at that time. As an AD, you are well aware you're beyond busy, and
Right.
so I didn't do much at that time, but over the years I tried to get other people involved. And there's been always 2 or 3 of us involved, but no big organization. 3 years ago, we got several involved. We went to the NIAAA conference this year with 13 people. Last year we had 15, so we're making strides. Also ran a class, 504 in Alaska. Tall and Phil came up and ran it. It was great. People that attended it, I mean, we had about 20 people there. Well, 20 that stayed for the whole thing. We had several coming and going. And that's a huge step. We're moving forward with it. We're going to try and do some other kind of training in January or April this year. And so we are continuing to move forward slowly. But for me, it's been a very long process because, as I said, I started this back in the late 90s. So
Sure.
really great to see it coming around. I hope it stays that way.
Let me ask you then a follow-up because one of the questions I had is the recent trip. I know I called Tall about something else. He said, "Well, it's going to have to be next week because I got to go to Alaska with Phil Risen." And so, talk about the fact that they came up there and what courses were offered and what a difference it's made to the Alaska ADs.
Well, we only offered one course. It was 504. We had a time when Phil did a presentation that was not about the course. It was about being an AD. And then Tall did the same thing. And we had probably 40 people during that time. Then they taught the 504 course. It was a huge eye opener for our ADs. I don't even know how to explain how big it was. And people were like, whoa, I already do that. I need to change, because 504 is the legal class.
Right.
14 legal duties. And
it's the one in Utah. When I asked the ADs this question, they say, well, I took 504 from Lee Green and immediately thought I wanted to quit my job, but continue.
Exactly. But, Phil and Tall are such proponents of ADs and getting them educated. And one of our strategic goals this year is at ASA, the Alaska School Activities Association, is to do a better job of training our ADs, getting them information, teaching them how to work with their coaches. I don't know if you're aware, but we have about 220 schools in our state. 120 something of them have less than 60 students. And so the turnover rate of ADs in those small schools is huge. It is usually the principal, and it usually lasts about 2 years, and then there's a big turnover. So we have a challenge to get these people informed, and they're coming into these small communities just trying to figure out what they're doing, and being the AD is, getting training as an AD is definitely not at the top of their list. Not because they don't want it to be, it's just they're trying to figure out day to day. So it's a little bit different than the schools down there.
Oh,
I'm
I
sure
would
some
absolutely.
that are ADs, but for the most part, most ADs are either ADs or teaching a couple classes and yeah, a little different up here.
Well, let me ask you this then. And so you said you had 220 schools, which I had no idea there was that many. We have what, 159 in Utah, but then you said 120 of them have less than 60 students.
Correct.
So, I mean, that's so I can see where the turnover comes. So let me just ask you a couple of questions. So how many high schools in Nome, for example?
One,
Okay, and how about Fairbanks?
Fairbanks has 1, 2, 3, 4.
And Anchorage, I would think, has the most.
Yeah, they have 8.
They have 8.
Anchorage
What about Juneau?
Juneau had, well, interesting you ask. On 208, in 207 and earlier, there was one high school in Juneau. In 208, they opened a second high school. And in 223, they closed the second high school, so it's back to 1.
So it's back to 1. And so what about a place like Sitka? Just 1?
Sitka has 1. Well, they have a state boarding school,
Oh,
which
okay.
doesn't take Sitka. I mean, they have very few Sitka kids. Those are kids that come from all over the villages, and villages that either don't have a high school, or the kids need a different experience. So, but technically there's one high school in Sitka. Ketchikan has one high school.
Yeah, okay. So that's yeah, and so off the top of my head, that's maybe 14, 15 high schools out of the 220. And those would be the towns that most people would know that don't live in Alaska. And so there's got to be so many
Yeah.
of, like you say, the smaller cities and the smaller towns with not very many kids. That's got to be it's like you talked about earlier. That's got to be a tough deal. So
Yeah. We offer football up here, and of course it's mostly the large schools, but we only have 24 football teams total.
is it like, so is it one class or is it split into two
No, it's
classes?
3 classes, unfortunately, and we're talking about making changes to it. But the large schools play, but then we have some schools that only have 120 to 150 kids that play football.
Sure,
Um,
sure. Same thing we have here in Utah. So,
yeah.
well, you talked about you brought 13 people from Alaska to Austin. So talk about your observations about the recent conference in Austin. I know I was able to see you again there and beg you out of another Alaska pin because those are hot commodities. So anyway, besides that, talk about the important things about what your observations were about the conference, and what do you think it meant to those 13 Alaska people that attended?
Well, my observations are I truly believe the NIAAA conference is one of the best ones. I attend the NFHS conference, which is different.
Hmm.
But it's geared towards, activities associations, state activities associations. Um, but just the wide variety of offerings, the information, the networking, just sitting down and talking with someone about what they're doing and what they're doing differently. It doesn't even have to be you know, in a class or in a workshop. And that to me is one of the most important things, is just sitting down and talking with people. The 13 that attended, I think and I might get this wrong because I can't remember, but I think 6 of them had never attended before. And they thought it was great. They took away things that they're going to start using. My
Right.
executive director for ASA, Billy Strickland, was an AD in Bethel for several years, and he had never attended the NIAAA conference. He attends, the NFHS conferences, but had never.
Sure.
And he said, "This was great. I'm going to try and do this every year. There's so much we can get out of this, and so much networking that goes on." So, um,
That's
yeah,
awesome. What's the
yeah.
favorite part of your job, Sandy?
Favorite part of my job is knowing that I make a difference in kids' lives, working with them, watching them grow and change. And, at the association level, um, you don't work with the kids as closely as you do as a school AD, but you can still see things, see their joy, see their commitment to being the best they can be. I really enjoy working with the coaches and teaching them and helping them expand their ability to coach. And the same thing with the ADs. I guess I'm an instructor at heart.
That's awesome. Always
Been
an
doing it a
educator.
long time.
Yeah, well, yeah, over 40-year career, you're to be commended for that. And speaking of that, let's finish up with a couple of questions. With all your vast knowledge, being an AD for all those years working in the state activities office, if you were to give 2 suggestions to a brand new athletic administrator and they need to follow Sandy's suggestions in order to be a success, what would those 2 suggestions be?
Um, what probably the one that helped me the most was getting out and going to practices, talking with the kids, talking with the coaches, getting feedback from them on, how they're doing, what's happening. I didn't do that much my first year, but I did it the second year. Um, and some coaches were a little intimidated by it, but I
Mm,
was not there to intimidate them. I was there to work with them. And
sure.
over the years, that's what I did. I went to practices whenever I could. And I didn't stay, I'm not there very long, but I think that gives an AD a sense of all their activities. I mean, you might be a wrestling coach and become an AD, but you can't just go to the wrestling practice. You got to go to the basketball and the volleyball and the music and to learn about what goes on with those activities. And that probably helped me the best because I have a big background. I've done a lot of activities. I've coached a lot of things, but I still didn't know how certain things worked. And that was probably one of the ones that I felt the most helpful. And then the other thing was to find you don't always have a say over who your admin is. So you don't
Right.
always have a supportive admin. Um, but to find someone that mentors you, that you can call and ask questions no matter what happens. And don't be afraid to call and ask questions. It will make your life so much easier because as you know, AD jobs can be pretty stressful.
To say the least. Let's finish up with this question, Sandy. What question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
That was another one I didn't have any sense of. I can't answer that really. I don't know. I think you've covered a lot of territory and hopefully I've answered the questions to your satisfaction.
No, no, you obviously did. I just wanted the people to get a sense of how Alaska is quite different than, with maybe the exception of Hawaii, all of our states on the main 48, because, a $400,000 a year just on travel and getting kids from contest to contest where they're so spread out and having so many small schools. I'm just hoping that together we gave our listeners a sense of what it's like to be up there in Alaska. So I wanted to thank you. And on that note, That wraps up this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our special guest today has been Sandi Wagner, the Executive Director of the Alaska Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association, and a guest that kicks off actually episode 1 of the 13th season of the UIAAA Connection. So, Sandi, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. It was fun trying to come up with my answers.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.